This is Sam Whitwer, and you are listening to Page Turners. They were not.
Everyone. My name is Brendan Moore. That noise you hear is my ventilator. Welcome to Page Turners They Were Not, my Star Wars podcast. It's been a while since I recorded an episode. Certainly there's been a lot to talk about. But what I wanted to talk about in particular is looking back on the Acolyte. It has been more than a year since the show came out and then was canceled. Or perhaps the better word is discontinued, but we all figured it meant the same thing as a cancellation. It was a dark time for the fandom, but thankfully afterwards we got Skeleton Crew, which was delightful, and Andor season 2. And Andor season 2, I mean, what can you say other than it's incredible. But in terms of the Acolyte, I have to confess that it might be my least favorite of the Star Wars shows, or the one that I am least interested in revisiting. But before we get to that, I just wanted to address the elephant in the room of the Ben Solo movie news. Um, Basically, there was an idea that Adam Driver and director Steven Soderbergh, forgive me, came up with of what they were calling the hunt for Ben Solo, which is basically trying to find Ben Solo after his death. They had the idea. I don't know if they had a completed script or not. They pitched it. Everyone at Lucasfilm loved it. They pitched it to Disney. And accordingly, Bob Iger, the president of Disney, said, I don't see how he could be alive. And they canceled the project. Now, all this is according to Adam Driver's words. And if it is true, yes, it is disappointing. Because, I mean, I don't know what Iger's talking about, but there are so many ways you can explain the return of Ben Solo. Particularly if we're talking about a dyad with Rey. We don't know exactly what the dyad in the Force could lead to. And so, but I am of the opinion that even though that project was canceled, there are always ways that that idea could be resurrected in the future. That's all I have to say about that. So, the Acolyte. When they were building up to the Acolyte, I have to admit I was rather nervous. I'm a religious person who belongs to a religious, um, an organized religion. And a lot of the talk about the Acolyte before it came out seemed to suggest that they would be challenging the idea of the Jedi Order. Now, we have seen this before in like the prequels. Um, the idea of questioning the Jedi Order does not bother me. Just like questioning organized religion does not bother me. I was afraid that we'd be looking at a takedown of organized religion. And that's not something that I'm comfortable with. Now, what we end up getting in the Acolyte is actually not a takedown of organized religion, because we're not talking about the Jedi Order as a whole. We're talking about the mistakes of some Jedi. So let's get into that a little bit. For a long time, for almost a year, I was wrestling with my feelings toward the Acolyte, and I really wasn't sure how to articulate it properly. I saw a post, a well-meaning post, not trying to be toxic, just a well-meaning, thought-out idea. And the person who wrote it said that the Acolyte did not work for them because it made the Jedi too suspicious, or sus, as the kids say. It made the dark side seem too appealing. I agree with that sentiment, and then I realized something. That's the point. We have seen in Star Wars villainy and good divided into here are the good guys, here are the bad guys, end of story. And if you look at like the Empire and the dark side, in most of Star Wars, what are they doing? They're blowing up planets, they're committing genocide, they're enslaving people, they're controlling people. Things that are very, very obviously bad. And we see the good guys doing things that are obviously good. The Acolyte presents us with bad guys who seem a lot more appealing than that. And the good guys seeming rather sus. So what do we ultimately get? Okay, the Jedi. What happened there? Master Soul made a big mistake. He did, a few of the others did as well. Vernestra has gotten too political. We saw a couple of the good guys make some really big mistakes. On the flip side, you have the stranger. Pioneer, played deliciously, I should say, by Manny Jacinto. Now, first of all, Manny is an attractive young man. So there's that surface level of that bad guy is attractive because, as we've seen, the villains in Star Wars usually are not the most attractive people. But here comes this hot young man. So you've got that. Also, he's doing his I'm just saying. The way that he, for lack of a better word, seduces Osha is by saying, hey, just hear me out. Yeah. I'm just saying. I'm just giving my opinion. I'm just giving a few thoughts. And what does he do? He speaks in half-truths. Not necessarily outright lies, though it does do that, but half-truths. I am of the belief that the devil deals in half-truths. And the devil figures, hey, if I can discredit religion, if I can make a few points that are right, people will say, hey, that's right, I agree with that. And you can discredit everything else that's true. Meaning, all you need is a little bit of those little barbs. A little bit of, hey, remember this, or you know this. And he's not wrong to say it. But it's false about everything else he's saying. But if he can get you to buy one of his lies, or one of his half-truths, then he can say, see, I told you so, and discredit the entire thing. If he can say, hey, you know, the Jedi made some mistakes here, and he's actually telling the truth, then he can say, see, that's why the Jedi are bad. So, in other words, he's able to use truth to spread lies. Now, that might not make sense, but he's saying things that are true. But it's all part of his plan to get. He's like a bad salesman. Or should I say, a really good salesman. Who's basically conning you into his schemes. So, what I came to realize about the show is that that's the point. That's the point of it. Is trying to make the dark side look good and appealing. And one of the big things that was infuriating for me and for a lot of fellow fans that I know was the discourse around the Acolyte as a series. People jumping to conclusions or drawing the wrong conclusions. But also, if you consider the way that it unfolded, it's a mystery. And so each episode added a new piece to the puzzle. But the problem was that there would only be like 2 or 3 episodes out. And immediately everyone would jump to the conclusion of what they thought was going on. Only to have the next episode prove them wrong. And so the discussion got very, very infuriating. Because people were drawing conclusions before it was finished. Conclusions about the story. We're not talking about the racist, sexist, homophobic, angry Gen Xers who trashed the show. But the people who were invested, I think, were drawing the wrong conclusions. Because that's the way that the show unfolded. So let's talk about the witches, for example. I know a few people who were absolutely convinced that the witches were the good guys. I'm going to disagree with that point. The idea of a group of force-sensitive people doing their own thing is not a big deal. That's like, okay, they can do their own thing, no problem. But what then became complicated is you realize, what did the witches actually do? First of all, they created life using the force. Okay, not a big deal. Didn't bother me too much. Whether it's dark side or light side, I have no idea. Probably dark side because they were manipulating the natural order. But then what did they do with that life that they created? Through the force, artificially splitting a consciousness in two. Instead of having the egg divide the way it would in naturally to create twins, the witches took one soul and artificially split that soul into two. In my mind, that's dark side and that's bad. So I don't think that we can say the witches are blameless. Furthermore, Mother Anastasia was pretty reasonable. Though admittedly she was maybe a little unreasonable when it came to the Jedi. I think Mother Anastasia just assumed that the Jedi were lying. Which I think she was wrong to do so. But then you had Mother Coral and a lot of the other witches were militantly opposed to the Jedi and probably would have killed the Jedi if they had the chance. Now, as far as we're aware, the witches believe that the galaxy is not kind to women like them. I assume they believe that they're being persecuted for being Force users that are not Jedi. Now, in my opinion, we have seen no evidence of that in Star Wars. Actually, it might not be an opinion, it might be something in canon. That we have never seen a moment, as far as I know, of the Jedi saying no one else is allowed to use the Force but us. That's what the witches believe. Now, I think might be a, how do I phrase this? A persecution complex on the part of the witches. That they feel persecuted even if there is no persecution. I don't think it set it up very well, personally. Because I think it should have, and mind you, I'm not a writer, but if it had been established that the Jedi do not trust other Force users, then I would have been able to buy that story. But I don't buy that story because we haven't seen that in Star Wars. Saying it isn't there, I'm just saying we haven't seen it. So for me, it was hard to buy that part of the story. But it could be they just have a persecution complex. So those are my thoughts on the witches. Mm. As far as the idea of does the show make the dark side seem too positive? Well, I think a lot of us are hoodwinked, like Osha was. Osha turned to the dark side because she bought Chimera's lies. And she started to go, well, I had a bad experience with the Jedi. Therefore, I'm going to turn to the dark side and murder my master. Whether she had a right to be angry at Soul or not, she probably did have the right to be angry. But if anyone is watching the show say, yay, she killed him, I think they may be missing the point. It's, he didn't deserve that, no matter what he did. And I think that one of the dangers of the show is the number of fans who agreed with her choice to turn to the dark side and kill her master. Because in my mind, that's not the point of the show. The show is showing us why someone would choose the dark side. And we see this. All the people who choose the dark side in Star Wars, or at least most of them, have quote unquote reasons to do so because they've been damaged emotionally. Osha was damaged emotionally, so she chose the dark side. And the other element I want to comment is Senator Raincourt. I do not agree with that guy. I find that guy to be pretty sus. Yet again, there were fans who thought he was right. But in all truth, I think he was totally wrong. And he might be one of the reasons why the Jedi end up too closely tied to the government of the Republic. And I think that his assertion was incorrect. That the Jedi needed to be held in check. If you think about it, it's the Sokovia Accords from the MCU. It's if you put the superheroes under control of the government, and the government is corrupt and evil, then the superheroes are going to be corrupted too. That's why in the MCU, kind of like what's going on in the Acolyte, I agree with Captain America's approach. And over in the Galactic Republic, Senator Raincourt was trying to put the Jedi Order under direct control of the government, which, as a spiritual group, they should not be in control of any government, or the other way around. They shouldn't be in control of the government, and the government shouldn't be in control of the Jedi, because what we're looking at is a serious violation of church and state. And looking at it in our real world, churches should not be tied to the government or vice versa, because that is a violation of the idea of being free to worship as you please, but also being trying to avoid the corruption that comes with governments leaking into churches, because we've seen that happen in our real world, and it's not a good thing. So basically what I'm saying is that The Acolyte is a fascinating series, because even though it frustrated me, and it might be one of my least favorite of the Star Wars shows, the ideas it presented are fascinating. I think that, as a lot of fans feel, that some fans took it the wrong way. And I think the whole point is it's meant to deceive, because that's what the dark side does. So I am sad that the show got canceled, because I would have wanted to see them flesh it out in further seasons. Imagine that they will still be able to tell the story in some fashion. It felt very sad, because it felt like the toxic fans had a victory. They were celebrating the cancellation of the show. And we won't talk about those guys who decided to have a funeral for Star Wars. If you haven't heard of that, don't look it up. It's terrible. A bunch of Gen Xers who've been angry since Return of the Jedi. Anyhow, so The Acolyte was a fascinating show. Sad what happened to it. I'm also sad that it was so misinterpreted. But nonetheless, it was able to accomplish what it set out to do, providing us a unique look at the dark side that we had not seen before, and understand why the dark side is so compelling, which is why it's important to avoid the dark side. So those are my thoughts on The Acolyte after a year. Well, more like a year and a half. My name is Brendan Marr, that noisy hearing is the ventilator. Thank you for tuning in to Page Turners They Were Not, a Star Wars podcast. And this episode of Only What You Take With You. As always, may the Force be with you.